Pointed it out to me, and Claudia said quite rightly, though rather sharply, it's because your brain was manufactured in Europe. Very important to know that being African does not make you know anything about Africa. Most Africans know nothing about this. It is only within the last year or two that secret copies of the Journal of African Civilizations are finding themselves in many places. I was starting to find how many South Africans knew about the journal because tapes had been smuggled into South Africa. So that you have to become aware that we are at the cutting edge of a whole new movement. Why we must feel great anger at what has happened in the past. Let us not give up hope, because something is beginning to turn in the world. And while it seems turbulent and confused, possibilities occur when cracks occur in rigid systems.
Utep family. Any questions or comments about the last class we had? Yeah. One of the things that this 6-week class does, which is what I really appreciate when we can get like this type of steady class going, is the fact that I can cover things to help us understand the Moors much better. I call it continuous history, and then I call it episodic history. Episodic history is when you study certain episodes. For instance, the Moors. You do a presentation on the Moors from 710 to 1492. However, the challenge with that is you don't know what brought the Moors into existence, and you don't know what happens after 1492. So that when you have the type of opportunity that we have here to have 6 classes where I can devote 2-3 hours, it allows us to look at continuous history. So that it's very difficult to understand, to me, it's very difficult to really understand these Africans in North Africa. It's very difficult even to understand the word Moor. Because for some reason, when we use the word Moor, and rightly so because of the nature of people such as Noble Drew Ali and the Moorish Science Temple of America, you get the impression that Moors are different or distinct from African people. So you lose the fact that when we talk about Moors as it relates to medieval history, it's like when the Greeks talked about Ethiopians. Ethiopians and Moors are the same people. Kemites, Egyptians, and Dogon are the same people. And so when you study episodic history, the Moors become a very distinct African that almost have a personality to themselves, which in the long range of studying it, you lose sight. The Moors were not the first people to go into Spain. In fact, there's evidence of Taharqa. During the 25th dynasty, there are steles. Dr. Van Sertima, in fact, when we get to that point in class, I'm going to show you a cartouche that dates back thousands of years, long before who we call the Moors were in there. Moors become a word we use because of the nature of the medieval period. From 1492 on, these same people we call Moors, we are now calling Negroes. Before they were Moors, they were called Ethiopians. The bottom line, no matter who is using these words, these people are the same, and basically the name that is being put on them means people of burnt faces, or melanated people. And so last week's class gave me an opportunity to be able to go back to where the human family came from. You know, before we even talk 710, where did the human family come from? What brought them into existence? What allowed them to become and sustain them? What was it that brought them into existence? What was it that took them and allowed them to live? And we looked at 3 laws: Glosier's law, Bergman's law, and Allen's law. These are scientific laws that deal with pigmentation, that deals with body mass, and also deals with concepts as it relates to the physicalness of a human being. But not just human beings, but of organic life, because like we said, Glosier was into avian history. He was into bird history. So the idea of studying pigmentation didn't come from skin, it came from studying the colors of feathers on birds. So when we look at science, and when we talk from a scientific perspective, it allows us to shut down a lot of opposition. And I find it interesting that having a 6 workshop series allows us to really get deep inside this conversation and really flesh this conversation out so that we can understand from a scientific perspective what we're looking at. It also helps us understand the superficiality and the shallowness of white supremacy. And it also helps us understand that it was born to die. That can't sustain itself. Because the more science is coming out with information, the further back in Africa it's going. Psychiatry right now is going back to Africa. Spirituality, religions are going back to Africa. Physics is going back to Africa. Things that Africans were saying, that people are saying were superstitious or were animalistic, you know, where they were worshiping animals or worshiping rocks, or all that, animism, all of that now, physics and science is going back and saying, but wait a minute, there's some serious points to this. But as literal thinkers, as opposed to circulinear, which was the African perspective of things, we couldn't get it. Because there are some things that's not on a straight line. There are some answers that are on the curved line. But if you're thinking linearly, you can never come back around to look at the answers. So, with that, if there's any questions or just ideas that you have, that you just want to talk before we get into today's class. And I'm going to explain to you again how the growth of these classes is going, and as you're thinking. The other thing I wanted to tell you was, I know that it may be difficult getting those books. So what I did was to make copies of the essays and offer a package of all the essays. Now, let me say this to you. How many of you do not have access to a computer that you could download it? And I'm not just saying it personal, but if you know somebody that does. The reason why I say that is because if I were to make Xerox copies of these things, I'd have to charge too much money. Because there's a lot of essays that you can see. I'd rather be able to have you download them. And I can bring the price down to $30 for the packet. as opposed to what it would cost to Xerox each page and then put it into this type of a form. So what I'm thinking about doing, and what I've done for these first 2 classes, is I have already downloaded the essays. And each class, what I'll do is I'll download the essays, and as I do it, I can download it to you. And the way I think that we can do this is to pass around a sheet of paper, and that you put your name and your email address, your contact, and let me be able to send it to you via the computer. This is a wonderful thing, you know. It allows me to get a lot of information to you and bring down the price significantly. And so this is the way I think we can do it. And I don't mean to step on other people who have written books. It's still, if you can get the book, I encourage you to get the book. Though these books that I'm sharing with you, as it applies to the Moors, there's other essays in the golden age of the Moor that is so relevant to what you need. I mean, I'm thinking about Dr. Edward Scobie's piece on Portugal and the expansion of Portugal as it relates to the Moors. Now, we talk about Spain, but what we don't understand is that Spain didn't exist at this time. Portugal didn't exist at this time. It has come into existence since then. The Spanish language didn't exist until the 16th century. The Spanish language that we know of today, based on Latin, did not exist as a spoken language, didn't have its syntax and grammar intact until much later. And there's an essay that I believe that will be part of the packet by Jose Pimento Bay, his Cuban brother, Moor, deep Moor, original Moor. He's from a family of Moors. A brilliant brother. He may have spoken here before. But he talks about the development of the so-called Romance languages that basically is going to come directly out of the Africans going in to Europe and organizing a disorganized feudal system. Because remember, that's what's in Europe, the feudal system, the serf and the lord. And that's very disorganized. What the Moors, what Africans are going to do is go into Europe and going to start to organize the little principalities or the city, Zaragoza, Cordoba, all these principalities. They're going to organize it, create governments, so to speak. And the interesting thing is that Africans are going to allow people of Jewish faith, the Sephardim, to have their own court system. They're going to allow the Christians to have their own court system. So it's not even like these Africans are coming in and dominating people, saying, you got to do this. What they're doing is that they're organizing cities, but they're respecting people's belief systems and other organizational skills, which is going to be their undoing, because they don't know who they're dealing with now. They're coming in with a mindset that is very different from the mindset that is amongst the Visigoths and the Vandals. Now, to understand Visigoths and Vandals, you have to study Germany, Norway, Sweden, all up in the northern area. You have to understand the Ice Age, which was, we spoke about last week. And the Ice Age mentality, the kind of mentality that you have. Think about it. I really admire all of y'all for coming to class today, because it is a beautiful day outside, isn't it? Didn't we want to hang out today? Last week we did. Last class we didn't want to hang out. It was good to be in here. Sister made that warm soup, hooked everybody up, you know? But today is the kind of day we want, because naturally we are natural people who want to be in nature, in the presence of the sun. Well, imagine an organism that is denied that, the kind of mindset you'll develop. These are the people that the Moors are dealing with back then. And what's interesting is, it's really interesting about psychology, because some of the things that I noticed, some of the, let's call them politicians, not going to name anybody, because the Democrats were just as bad on President Obama as the Republicans were. In fact, what put the situation in place was the Democrats that ran rampant against President Obama. And in so doing, weakened the Democratic Party. Had they rallied around him like they're rallying around the present-day president, if the Democrats had rallied around and said, look, I don't care the brother, I don't care if he's black, I'm going to support him at all costs, this past election would have turned out differently. Nobody wants to talk about these issues, but that's okay. But the idea that I'm trying to get to is that when I read about the way in which the Europeans in Europe dealt with the Moors was very much like the way in which Europeans dealt with President Obama. There was a jealousy, there was an anger, there was a fear, because that brother did things as president that no other president has ever done. I don't care what anybody says, he's the greatest president that ever sat in the White House for what he did, what he went into, and what he experienced when he went in. Economically, politically, socially, the wars that were going on. What he was able to do in 8 years was to literally turn the way in which America was going around. But I saw an interview with a man from Detroit that worked in one of the automobile factories when President Obama was already in office, and I think they were going towards the second term. And they interviewed him. He said that he wasn't going to vote for President Obama. And they said to him, but President Obama saved your job. He said, not only did he save my job, but I got a promotion. But I'm still not going to vote for him. People are willing to commit their own intellectual suicide when it comes to dealing with a successful person of color. They would rather see you fail, just like they said. My job is to make sure he doesn't become president for a second term. It didn't make a difference how successful it was. It didn't make a difference how much he was doing for America. They even turned against America, let America go down economically so that it would look like he was failing. I even heard some of them praise Putin and dare say that Putin was more of a man than President Obama. This is how deep this psychosis goes, family. This is who we're dealing with. But I say this not just in isolation of today. I'm going back to when Moors and Africans were in Europe. This is what was going on. They were building up cities. They were creating jobs. They were expanding agricultural science. But even all that was going on, they still wanted the Moors out of Europe. They were biting the hand that fed them. They were willing to let it go down. And you know, there's a gentleman, Dr. Ben used to always refer to the Moors in Spain by Stanley Lane Poole. Well, Stanley Lane Poole also wrote a book, Spain After the Moors. And Europe has been on a downspin since 1492. The only thing that saved them was the select few that came to America and enslaved Africans and stole the land from indigenous people. See, this is what's going on now with the European Union. This is what's going on now with the Euro. This is what's going on with Brexit. This is what the Vice President was talking to the European Union in Germany about these past couple of days. The system in Greece is over. The system in Italy is over. The system in Spain is over. Europe is on a downswing. That's why, family, we got to get ourselves together. Because when this stuff falls through, what are we going to do? We going to go down with that? Or are we going to have an economic system? Or are we going to have a spiritual system? Are we going to have a labor system where we can hire our own? Or are we going to go down? This is what's so important to me right now. I don't care what they do. We're spending too much time worried about them. It's getting to the point now, I'm just turning MSNBC and all the radios, because they're saying the same thing. And the thing that they're saying, but they don't want to say it, is that their time is up. But something that we have to start thinking about, family. It's really something that we have to start thinking about. But with that, really what I'm trying to get out of this with you is to understand the tone of Europe as Moors are going in. And also, what we're going to talk about today is the very beginnings of the Ice Age melting and Europeans from the northern countries coming down into the southern lands, and they're going to find themselves in the Mediterranean basin. And that's what these 4 essays are that we're going to deal with. The 4 essays in the book that I shared with you deal with what's happening in the Mediterranean basin. You know, to understand the people that we call the Romans came out of northern climates. Came down through Macedonia, Slovenia. You'll see. But when they come down, they're going to meet an African people. The people who were living in what we today call Italy were called Etruscans. The Etruscans were black. Period. But the way in which history is given to you, you would think that Romans controlled Rome. Not telling you that these were migrant people coming from the north that settled in this Mediterranean basin and had met Africans that had already had civilizations up and running for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And so they attached themselves to these civilizations, learned the most that they possibly could, threw away the rest, and then put their name on what they discovered. These northern people are going to come, for instance, in Italy, they're going to come down and they're going to settle around 7 mountains systems that are known as Latium. And that's where the word Latin comes from. It's from the word Latium. Then they're going to take the Assyrian drama. They're going to take Cain and Abel. They're going to be introduced to African stories, and they're going to develop a story about, well, let me put it to you like this. If I may use this language, I'm going to use this only in terms of discussing who they are. Western civilization bases itself on Western concepts and the Roman system, okay? And there was a time when I had a discussion, and there was a person of another culture who thought he was going to be real slick and say, you are a son of a gorilla. And I said, yeah, I am. I am a son of gorilla. And you are a son of a bitch. Now, if you remember the story of Romulus and Remus, who suckled at a she-wolf's breast, then your mama was a female dog, which to me is a bitch.
Bitter child.
Okay. Now, I only use that word to describe, it's a story you'll never forget, you know. There are certain things that when I hit you with it, you know, you never forget.
Yes.
But their story of evolution in life comes from Romulus and Remus. And if Remus had won, the capital of Italy would be called Rome and not Rome, because Romulus was the one that won the fight between these two brothers, Romulus and Remus. This is their origins. Their mama was a she-wolf. So do you wonder why they conduct themselves wolfish? So, what I'd like to do is I just want to break away for a moment from the story itself, and I want to talk to you about the way the brain functions. And I just want to show you something, some work that I've developed when I do staff development. And I teach what I consider to be the depth of information. In the back of your mind, the way in which our ancestors taught is you're always thinking about subject areas. Right now we're caught up in subject areas. You go to school, you learn subject areas. You go to college, you take courses specific to subject areas. Okay? Now, what I'm showing you here is the subject areas that we study in school. Okay? You know, this is interesting. This is something that I'll talk to you about as we go down, but this is some of the work that I've done in school systems around the country, dealing with cultural competency. This is in Indianapolis that I was working here in the Board of Education. And this is a 3-day seminar that I do with the teachers. And I feel it's important to do it with you also. because it's going to help you understand what we're talking about even more. Okay? So, basically, when you study, they talk about the arts and the sciences. From a universal perspective, from an African perspective, there are three sciences. Science comes from the word scient, out of Greek, which the Greeks got from the Kemites. That's why you have the concept of the creator being omnipresent, all over, all-knowing is omniscient. Omni, all, scient mean knowing. The way in which we teach science is like biology, chemistry, physics, okay? But it's not. Science is all knowledge. That's what it means, all knowledge. To African people studying the Kemetic legacy, going into the temples of Kemet and going to the Dogon, you have three sciences. However, in the world we're living in today, they can't handle the way in which African people called that first science. They called it spiritual science. Today we call it communication arts. Communication arts includes the subjects that we teach in school. Remember when you were in school, we were in school, we studied performing arts, which could be choral, music, physical education, dance, okay? Creative arts includes arts and crafts, sculpture, you know, anybody know any other creative arts? Please. Painting, yes. Any others? Say again?
Spoken word.
Yeah, well, writing is going to be there, but you're going to notice something when we go to writing. Say again, my sister?
Spoken word.
Spoken word would be also, yes. But in terms of creative arts, what I'm doing is macrame, knitting, things you do with your hands.
Yeah.
Creative, right? And then language arts is writing, spoken word. You also notice that all three are related. You could have put those subject areas in any one of those three areas. Because to knit, you have to perform. So it's a performing art. You see? And the reason why to us it was called spiritual is because in those three sciences, there's no one way to do it. If I were to ask us to draw a tree in this room, there's a chance that everybody in this room would draw a tree, it would look different. If we knit something, it would look different. It would be similar maybe, but there would be a difference to it. Because we would bring a flavor, we would bring our own personal energy to the activity. Whereas in physical sciences, basically they're all the same. 2 plus 2, we should all come up with a concept of 4. Now I know there's people that will argue that, but that's okay, I'm not going to go there. For the most part, 1 plus 1 equals 2. So in that sense, we all would come up with the same answer. So the physical sciences are the codification or the writing down of the spiritual sciences. Okay? And in our schools, we have subjects that we today call STEM. Science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. In science, there's 3 different sciences, very interesting, that we teach. Earth science, physical science, and life science. What's also interesting is that there is a direct relationship between science and mathematics. I wish I knew when I was young what I know now about science and math. It's so beautiful. It's really, you know, science and math is as beautiful as a painting. And it's so sad that the way it's taught in our school system today is so boring. And it doesn't relate to the human being at all. Study it so you can pass a test. So you go to the next grade. But they don't teach it to you in a way that you can see literally that we are walking mathematics. That science is knowledge. Math is comprehension. Math gives you the numbers that you fit into the formulas of science. They're related, like husband and wife. Engineering and technology are related, but they don't teach it in its relationship. The social sciences deal with the 5 questions, or some people say 6, but really the overall question is why. Geography, as we said the last time, answers the question where. History, when. Okay? Politics is how. Economics is what. And culture is who. So, in our educational system, the arts and sciences, whatever you study in school, you can look at all your subjects that you study in school, from pre-kindergarten straight through doctoral programs. I can find one of these subjects in what you're going to teach. And the way in which we were taught in the universal way of thinking, in the temples of Africa, in the schools of Africa, we were taught to be searching for those subject areas in everything that you were learning. Where is the math in art? Where is the science in music? And so it became very important for us to understand this. But now, how do we do this? We take these concepts, these subject areas, and then we put them in what is now coming to be called multiple intelligences. In other words, what we're saying is that in school right now, you take tests in science and math, reading, and if you do well, they say, wow, you're a genius. Mm-hmm. But in the real world, there are other areas to be a genius, such as music. Music, you could be a genius. Ahine takes a 5th grade, and please, if I'm repeating myself, because sometimes, I do this so much, sometimes I find myself repeating myself. So please understand this. I'm not in the beginning stages of Alzheimer's. I'm just teaching you so much that I just repeat. And sometimes it's good to repeat, because sometimes we get deeper into something the 2nd or 3rd time around. Ahine is in 4th grade, and we're teaching her finding the common denominator. Okay? And we give Ahine a math test, and she gets 8 out of 10 incorrect. And we say to Ahine, Ahine, you failed. You don't understand fractions. Now that hurts Ahine's feelings. So she go outside, she puts her headset on, and Ahine starts singing Girl on Fire by Alicia Keys. Now, Ahine can sing, okay? So you know what I'm talking about, right? Sang is steps beyond she can sing.
Exactly.
Okay, she can sing. Then if I put my inflection in my voice, that tells you something else. Sang is better than sang, is much better than sing. Then if I put my body into it, that sister can sing, right? Sang is better than sang, is better than sang, is better than sing. What I'm saying is that to us, as an original people, there is the concept we say, I love you so much words could never explain. Well, that's because what you are actually experiencing is an energy that can't be explained. So don't try. And the only way that you let someone know that that love or that hate, I'm so mad at you I could spit, okay? I'm so happy I could dance. All these emotions, when you get to its highest levels, it becomes an energy that is no longer explainable. Now, Ahine can sing. But what no one told Ahine is she couldn't have started that song without a fraction. 2/4 time, 3/4 time, 4/4 time. Musicians Every musician is a mathematician, but every mathematician isn't a musician. Musicians think in base 4. We live in base 10. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And then we have one set, 0 left over, which we call 10. But it's really not 10. In the base 9, it's one set, 0 left over. Musicians think in a system that goes 0, 1, 2, 3, one set, 0 left over. One set of 4. That's the base 4. So what we would call 4 in base 10 is really our visual of 10 in base 4. One set, 0 left over. In the base 7 system, you have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. One set, 0 left over. You see? Ahine in singing is doing fractions. Her voice is manipulating fractions. Now, is it that Ahine doesn't understand fractions, or is it that Ahine did not give it to us the way in which we asked her to give it to us? So what if we took the music teacher, or the choral teacher, or the gospel teacher, and the math teacher, and had a meeting with them and said, look, in your class, when you're teaching about mathematics, I want you to talk about Sister Williams, who is the music teacher, and Sister Williams in music class, I want you to remind about math in Mr. Smith class, so that the entry into knowledge of fraction doesn't come in math class, it comes in music class. You see? Every musician is a mathematician. Every dancer, when you're dancing, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. What I'm trying to do for us is I'm trying to open us up away from this system that suffocates us by limiting our genius. So therefore in class we get upset with Ahine if she doesn't do good on the math test, as opposed to telling Ahine, you can sing. You're a genius. You just got to understand that you're doing fractions in your songs. Kwame, we take a test. For instance, like I tell Kwame a story. I say, okay, Kwame, my son and I left our home today at 1:15. We were scheduled to get to Newark by 3 o'clock. However, on I-95, there was a truck whose load was too high for the bridge and literally had to stop in the middle of 95. And every car had to maneuver its way out for fear that that truck might have gone under the bridge, damaged the bridge, and that bridge might be coming down on all of us. You know what I'm saying? London Bridge is falling down? Okay. So we were waylaid a certain amount of time. If we were going to get to Newark by 3 o'clock, how much quicker would we have to have picked up our pace to get there on time, considering the amount of time we could not travel because of the stoppage? That is what we call in math, rate times time equals distance. The rate that you travel times the time that you travel determines the distance you will cover. Okay? Kwame gets 9 out of 10 incorrect. Teacher said, Kwame, you don't understand rate times time. However, in the process of that, he goes out backyard, starts shooting hoops. Kwame got netball pretty soon. Whoosh, whoosh, the ball just going right in the hoop. Now, what nobody told Kwame is that when you play basketball and you shoot, you are performing rate times time equals distance. The rate that you threw the ball times the time it's in the air determines its distance. If you start using the backboard, now you're dealing with geometry, because now you're dealing with angles. Particularly if you focus on that square that's just above the net. What would happen if we took the gym teacher and the math teacher and brought them together and said, look, when you have your class in gym class, explain to them the math of basketball or the math of baseball or the math in any sport. When they're doing calisthenics, teach them about the physics of calisthenics. And to the math teacher, tell the math teacher, you know, when you're teaching math class, remind the class about the math that goes into playing basketball or the math that goes in. So what I'm saying is that these areas of that we're looking at as intelligence, music is an intelligence that you can be a genius in. Intrapersonal, which is self-reflection, you can be a genius. The visual, spatial, the artists are geniuses. And you know what's interesting? The children say this all the time. I say it all the time too. Isn't it interesting that all the subjects that we claim that you're a genius if you do well in schooling, and all the subjects that they cut in order for you to get to be better scientists, like gym, art, isn't it funny that the people who are actors and actresses and sports players, isn't it interesting that their stars and teachers have got to scrounge to pay the rent? Where a basketball player, his salary could pay for an entire school of teachers. When you think of how much a basketball player makes, or when you think about how much someone makes when they do one movie, how much they make, compared to how much that scientist in the laboratory trying to find a cure for cancer. So our children are looking at this, they're saying, look, you're telling us to cut out gym and cut out art. But that's where the money is. Who are you playing with? Who cares about science? Muhammad Ali was not fluent in what's called formal education. But it's because of him that people are making millions of dollars in sports today.
Yes, sir.
Isn't it kind of ridiculous? And then our children are looking at us and they're looking at us and saying, you're lying to us. You're not telling us the truth. And then we wonder, well, why do they not trust us? Well, we're lying to them. Because we're not being honest with what it is that we're trying to get them to understand. The kinesthetic intelligence, which is where the sports people are. Interpersonal, your lawyers, people who are social. Logic is science and reasoning, and linguistics. Now, I'm these concepts to you. Not going to spend much time in that area, but the reason why I'm introducing this to you is because as we talk about today's subject, and as you look, in the back of your mind, I want you to be searching for where is the geography in what I'm learning? Where is the history? Where is the politics? Where is the economics? What I want us to begin to do is to understand that there is one knowledge base, and everything that we do, whether dealing with subject areas, it's like people who meditate. People who meditate have a mantra that they repeat. The mantra is not important. The mantra acts as the means to get to the end, which is to get yourself into a state of consciousness. The same thing with school. You're really not studying these subjects because the subjects are the end. The subjects are what you should be using to get to that point. There's a Moorish proverb that says, once you've learned what you set out to learn, you can throw that away because it was the process of learning it that was the truest education. Because wisdom and knowledge comes from the connecting of neurons in the brain. That's what wisdom is. It's not what you learned, it's how you learned it. And everything that you're going to experience for the rest of your life, I want you to hear my voice in the back of your mind asking, where's the geography in this? Where's the history? Where's the math? Where's the chemistry? Where's the physics? And there's a chance that you'll find a relationship between them all. Now, with that, there's a whole bunch of other things that we get into, but we don't need to get that now. The real point is for us to begin to think on that level in terms of the subject areas. Today's subject area, it's 4:38. Sister Patrice, Brother Greg, is there a particular time you wanted to take a break? Maybe 5:15, take a break? Okay. We'll take a break for the vendors and for the food and just to chill out and begin to look at certain things before we come back and sort of kind of round stuff out. What I did was I want you to think in terms of, and also, normally I can speak extemporaneously, but there are some things that I want on camera for one thing, but there's also points that I think I can't afford to be extemporaneous. I have to be very exact. So today I will have to read from some of my notes so that you can get the fullest of this information, because when it's on tape, you can always go back over it. But what I did was, is there a map on that one back there? Good, okay. What I want you to look at is the geography of today's class, which is the Mediterranean basin. A lot of conversation about who's in here. But what becomes important is that when you look at this map, this, for thousands of years, you have Africans from North Africa that are going to be going into these parts of the Mediterranean basin. Now, the other thing that I did was to look at the 21 countries. Okay, that's another picture of the countries. Here are the 21 countries that border the Mediterranean Sea. You are going to have Cushites. Put the concept of Kemites out the mind for a moment, because the Kemites are Cushites. You have Cushites that are going to leave Africa from every corner of the African continent. They're going to move north and west and all over the area. There'll be Africans that are going to move from Morocco. On a very good day, you could swim from the northernmost coast of Morocco to the southernmost coast of Spain. You could swim. On a good day, you literally can see Spain from Africa. And in the middle of this, you have what's called the Strait of Gibraltar, which, and we get into the Moors, you're going to see that the general that's going to go into Spain in 1492, his name is Tariq. And this mountain, the Strait of Gibraltar, this area here, is going to be called Gebel, G-E-B-E-L, Gebel Tariq. Gebel Tariq. And Gebel Tariq is going to be twisted to become Gebel, is going to become Jibra, and Tariq is going to become Tar. So Gebel Tariq is going to become Gibraltar. Okay? Africans are going to cross over. Africans are going to have boats and they're going to cross over. They're going to move across into these islands, which are called the Isles, Aegean Isles. Whether you're dealing with Sardinia or Corsica or Sicily or Malta or Crete, Cyprus, all of these are islands that are going to be inhabited by Cushites thousands of years ago. Because, like I say, the further back we go, the further black we go. And these essays talk about this. The title of this section is called African Presence in the Ancient Mediterranean Isles and mainland Greece. And it becomes important to understand this because you can get lost in current history. You could get lost in Sicily or in Sardinia or in Crete or in Cyprus because the people there today don't look like the original people, and the base of the people are still there, but there are so many peoples that have come from the northern climates up into the northern areas of Germany and Scandinavian countries that now they don't look like the original people. No more than the people of Egypt look like the original pyramid builders. No more than the present people of the United States of America who talk about make America great again. You know, you want to make America great again. I got a date for them. August 1492. That was the last time America was great. After that, in October, everything went downhill after that. But it's like thinking that President Bush or President Trump are the original peoples that were in America. In fact, even to look at indigenous people of the world today, they are not the original people of the American continent. There were migrations of people that came here. So, it's important that you look at these countries. Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, Egypt, Israel, Lebanon, okay, Syria, Turkey. You know, in school, you know, how many continents are there? How many continents do they say there are? 7. How do you define a continent? Come on, let's go back to 4th grade geography class. How do you define a continent? Please, Brother Greg.
Body of land that's surrounded all sides by water.
Yes, not just a body of land, but a large, okay? Is Europe surrounded by water? So what is Europe? A peninsula. How do we define a peninsula? A large landmass surrounded on 3 sides by water. Turkey is a peninsula. Spain is a peninsula. Europe is a peninsula. That's why we call it Eurasia, because that's the continent. Europe is not a continent by definition. Of course, I tell children if they ask you in school, you know, tell them 7. Don't get the answer wrong because you know the truth. Greece. Now, Greece didn't exist. When we're talking about Aristotle and all these people, the Greeks didn't exist. Alexander was from Macedonia. You see Montenegro, Bosnia, Herzegovina, Croatia, Slovenia. Isn't that where the First Lady's from? Where's she from? Okay. That's why she looked like that. She definitely got black in her. And you can see it in her brow ridge. You can see it in her nasal index. See, when you want to see who is African, you don't have to look at complexion or eye color or pigmentation. What you do is you look at the cranial. You look for the prognostic jaw. You look for the wide basal index. You look for the strong brow ridge. Okay, that's what shows you what an African skull looks like. And then when you go to the orthognathic jaw, which is more receded, you go into other understandings of what makes people look the way they look when you go back to Allen's law, Bergman's law, and Glosier's law. It's science. Heat expands, cold contracts. Science. Okay. And so Italy, and then you have Monaco, which is almost at the cusp of France and Italy. And then you have all these seas, which is in the bigger sea, which is the Mediterranean Sea. You have the Adriatic Sea, the Ionian Sea, the Aegean Sea, Sea of Crete. They have all these names. It means absolutely nothing. But what becomes important for our class today is for you to understand that this whole area that you're looking at, that is this light color compared to the darker green, and there's Portugal over here. What becomes important is to understand that these were inhabited by Africans thousands of years before the people that we know today came. That's the important thing to start with. And then, of course, what's important is to know what countries we're talking about. And so the countries that border the Mediterranean Sea is France, Monaco, Italy, Slovenia, Croatia, Greece, Turkey, Cyprus, Syria, Israel, Lebanon, Libya, Malta, Tunisia, and Morocco. In total, the Mediterranean Sea covers more than 1 million square miles. This is equivalent to approximately 1% of the Earth's entire surface. At its widest point, the sea spans 990 miles. Though most areas are narrower, the average depth of the sea is 4,921 feet, although some areas reach massive depths of more than 16,000 feet. Now, what's important about what I'm saying to you is this. It also tells you about seafarers. It tells you about areas that and how Africans would have gotten into those areas as it relates to boats, the building of boats, and their movement on the waters. It'll tell you a lot about what we're going to talk about when we deal with Phoenicia and Carthage and Numidia in the next class. So that everything that we're doing as I'm walking us through this gives me the opportunity to lay steps for us to understand, because by the time we get to the Moors in April and May, you'll have such a backdrop of information that the Moors will become, you'll wonder, why does anybody doubt that they would be there? That's the difference between continuous history and episodic history. Because when someone gives you the episode of the Moors, you say, well, how did they do that? How would they know I've done that? But when you go through continuous history, you lay the groundwork that you can understand why the Moors in 710 would end up there by nature. And that's what doing these 6 classes allows us to do. It allows us to look at the continuity of history. And so that while we may look at the episode of the Moors in April and May, what we've done January, February, March prepared us to understand the Moors and who they were, because they're already in this area. They're already there. And by waves, Africans are moving into the Mediterranean basin, and also by warfare. By the time the Assyrians now are getting into Egypt, Africans are moving west. As they move west, they also move north. As they move north, they go into Europe. So there are people who are already there. But we look at the episode of the Moors as 710, 1492, because there's a drastic change in European history. Why? Because European history is being taught to us. Because if I had my way, this is the history we'd study before we even talked about the medieval period. Any questions? Comments? Everybody's comfortable with what we've done so far? Okay, please feel free. If you want a point of clarification, if you want a spelling, or if you want me to repeat something, please feel free. Because this is the difference between a lecture and an experience. This ain't no lecture. This is an experience. Please.
You started to say where Mesopotamia was, that Greece didn't exist.
Yes.
So would that be all of modern day Greece, Albania, Montenegro, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Croatia, and Slovenia? Was that whole?
They weren't called that.
Okay. What was Mesopotamia?
It's hard to say. Well, we know that Mesopotamia now, you're dealing, you see, here's another piece. From my research, and I'm not saying that I'm correct. I don't know if I'm correct. But I'm going to tell you, I don't think Africans' perspective and philosophy of life needed a name for the continent. I don't think Africans had a name for the continent, because Africans were deeply steeped in nations. So you had the Konso people, or the Gala people, you know, or you had nations. You didn't have like the country of Ghana, so to speak. Ghana basically reflected a concept of gold. So they didn't call their countries. They were nation-based people. So that these terms that we have now, like Spain, Macedonia, Slovenia, even when you're in Greece, you're dealing with principalities. You're dealing still with nations. But the organization of nations created cities. Cities created countries. Countries created continents. And now we're living calling words. What did Africans call the continent of Africa? I don't think they had a word for Africa. I don't think they had a word for the continent because they were based on nations. They were more concerned about what they call their nations as opposed to their continent. It's a different way of thinking of the world. See, the first thing Europeans do when they take something over is they build fences. And they create boundaries to Africa and to indigenous peoples. We didn't own the land. The land wasn't ours. We were caretakers of the land for the greater spirit that had endowed us with life. So the idea of owning something or labeling something didn't exist. There might have been other labels that described different phenomena, normally natural, but they were principalities. Like it wasn't called Macedonia. It was called something else, but this land area became Macedonia. That's where Philip, whose son was Alexander, came from. And Aristotle was Philip's tutor and became Alexander's tutor. And then Aristotle's going to come to Egypt because he's already been influenced by his teacher, and his teacher has been influenced by Plato. And so, like, Aristotle's teacher, Plato. See, here's how you know it's nonsense. Aristotle, anybody know what Aristotle is known as the father of science? Okay, he's known as science, the father of science. Do you know what Plato, his teacher, was the father of? Philosophy. Now think about this. I consider myself a student of Professor John Henrik Clarke. Okay? And so basically, I consider myself, I teach history. Because Dr. Clarke taught history. And when I sat before the brother, elder brother, ancestor now, I learned history because he's the father of African history. So how are you going to become the father of science when your teacher was the father of philosophy? What it was is he just took all the books, located them in Alexandria, rewrote them, and put his name on. And that's going to come in with the essay where the brother, John Williams, is talking about the Stolen Legacy, a review where he reviews Stolen Legacy by George G.M. James. So that this is how you know that all this is nonsense. And not just that, he wrote so many books. They say he wrote 400, 500 books on all these different subjects. Well, wait a minute now. Who was your teacher? Who taught you all this? Well, ain't nobody taught him. He stole the books that the Kemites had written and rewrote them and sent them in Alexandria. And anything he didn't understand, he destroyed. And Bishop Landa did the same thing to the Native American codices of the Maya people. Did the same exact thing. Today in Spain, they have this big activity that they call the Day of the Bonfire. And the Day of the Bonfire is the celebration of bringing all the books of the Moors into Spain and burning them. They call them works of the devil because they were in Arabic. Yet all of their books were translated into Latin from Arabic. It's who you're dealing with. Please, my sister.
Oh, I I just wanted to add or share that when I was a student at college, and it was they wanted me to be like the president of the Black History Association, and I knew that my nationality, I couldn't accept that title, and I shared with them because so many of the other sisters and brothers was from other nationalities. They too did not want to be called Black. You know, so we had to all come back with names, and some said diaspora, others said what have you, but then I took them to a scripture that was in the Bible that they accepted, and it was, if I'm not mistaken, Revelation 1st chapter, verse 4 and 7, where it mentions about the landmass at first being Asia, and I guess before the floods, and you know, it became whatever the names were after that. So we went to, of course, the internet, and we did our research. I was getting ready to do it again now, but I don't have time. But it mentioned that Asia, whatever, the word Asia only means first. It's nothing for nobody to be all, you know, spooked out about it. So we call ourselves the Asiatic Students Association. Then people thought we was all Muslims or Muslims when we weren't. Some of us were, others were not. So then we decided just to go ahead and become African students of American students of African descent. But you cannot belong, you can't be an African American because that's two continents. And Black, if you look it up in the dictionary, which some people still want to consider themselves, like our brother Kaba was sharing with us, it means something negative, something that's not positive, you know, as opposed to white in the dictionary, it means something positive. So from my understanding, white means purity, purity means God, and God means ruler of the land. And I've never met a European or a Caucasian, when I asked their nationality, that told me they was white. We label them that. They know that they're not white. I can be white. So with that, I say peace.
By the way, my sister, when you said about Mesopotamia, the major nation of Mesopotamia was called Sumer. I just realized I didn't answer your question. Sumer, the Sumerians.
Yeah, because when I see it
Yes.
in text, when I'm reading about, I'm trying to get a handle on where geographically they're talking about. 'Cause
Yes. Yeah, you're basically talking about that. And then you have the Elamites. And then when you go to Persia, or what we today call Iran, you have the Medians. And again, I encourage us to look at the works of, and you see there's books out here that have it. In fact, my study guide lists the books, you know, that really talk about these different nations of that were African before there were ever Europeans in this area, what we call Eurasians. Before people came from the north and came down, these were all inhabited by people that were deeply melanated, very curly hair, wide nose, thick lip, broad nasal index, and brow ridge. And it's depicted in their photographs, their carvings, who the first Mesopotamians are, or Sumerians, or Elamites. It's there. And if you go to the book, The African Presence in Early Asia, you know, Runoko Rashidi and James Brunson, I mean, they've done some really phenomenal work. In this piece, the first piece that I'm going to read to you and talk to you about in terms of James Brunson, you know, James Brunson has phenomenal pictures of people who you're going to see in places like Pylos, you know, which is all in these areas that we're talking, or Mycenae, Mycenae. These are all places that are said to be within this Mediterranean basin, but when you look at the walls, they're African peoples. And African peoples, we have to be careful even in that designation of African people, because see, all these names divide us. And for as long as it divides us, it creates little camps of people where we don't realize that in Congo you have children born who are anywhere between a very well melanated to being albinoid. In Ethiopia you have people born that don't have very curly hair, they have wavy hair. In Australia you have people born with blonde hair. And all of this has to do with the gene pool and the relationship of the organism to the sun. But what white supremacy has done, it has bit us. And we have become like those who bit us, and so therefore all of our perceptions have been tainted by the parasite. So that you can have people that are well melanated. You can have people that may not be as melanated, but they're both African. You can have people with very curly hair, and you can have people that do not have very curly hair, may have wavy hair, may have straight hair, such as the Australians. They haven't been impacted by Eurasians. In their gene pool, they were born. And when you understand sebum and the impact that sebum, the oily waxy substance, has on the scalp, and you understand how people live, then you can understand why people would come out looking the way they look. But because we're living in a world that is white supremacist, everything is based on your complexion, your hair texture, the width of your nose. And we're getting caught up in that. But once you get to the science of it, then you understand what the science behind all of this is. So, what I'd like to do is maybe take a break before I get into these 4 subject areas. And what we'll do is that in this break, the vendors that we have, what do we have as people who are vending? Just so we know. Downstairs?
Jewelry, apparel, hats, t-shirts, and so forth.
And in the back there's food?
Yes.
Food there? Okay.
Veggie, it's a veggie faluta, coleslaw, and guacamole.
It's really good.
Water and snap.
Okay.
All right.
Just to give you a little sense of what I brought, I noted I had come before with the little pieces that I talked about counting. Well, I was able to order from the company actual pieces here. Also, in each one of our homes, we should have a telescope and a microscope. If you want to do anything in your home, you have a telescope and a microscope so that our children can see the big world and so they can see the inner world. And so I brought both with me. Oils. Heru has his pieces here. I have DVDs. And my book on Professor William Leo Hansberry. Now, Hansberry is interesting because a lot of what I'm talking about, the Kushites, Dr. Ben was to Egypt what Hansberry was to Ethiopia. So my research on Ethiopia and Kush is what grounds me in the deeper understanding of that Mediterranean basin. And it's important that we understand the Kushites, because it's only when you understand the Kushites that you can understand the Kemites. My brother Greg, how long will we take a break for, do you think?
15 minutes.
15 minutes? Okay, it's like 5:06 now. What do you say, like about maybe 5:20, something like that? Okay, let's take a break, family, and we'll come back in 15. Hotel.
We do have the copies of the first class here. Tomorrow, 3 p.m., Dr. Walter Williams will be here. If you guys are free, hope you can free up your schedule. But he'll be here tomorrow from 3 to 6.
I'm concerned about all that.
Yes.
No.
So I just, the thing about seltzer water is that I like the kick of seltzer water, you know, and it got me away from drinking sodas,
Okay.
you know, with the sugars and things like that, you know. You know, I tell people I ain't no saint, I tell you that right now. You know, before my days of being vegetarian, I used to kick back some pork, I'll tell you that right now. Yeah. I'm honest. Hey, I used to judge a city by how their spare ribs tasted. Gary, Indiana was the best. Chicago, Los Angeles, oh my goodness, I ate chitlins and Baltimore and South.
I ate it because my mother.
Ooh-wee.
My father gave me 20 years of age. I stopped.
Shake in, brother.
It might be your.
Stopped on my own. My mother died and I stopped. I didn't see
Good? Okay. Yeah, oh wow. And then I read a book called AIDS, Animals in Digestive System, by Michael T. Joseph. And that was it. I've been strict, I was on and off vegetarian for a very long time. maybe 40, 45 years.
That's great.
But I became strict vegetarian probably 30 years,
That's good.
where nothing with a mouth go in my mouth. You know, but it took a road to get here. That's why I understand. I tell people, you know, like, you know, don't get sanctimonious. You know, like when you quit something, people get sanctimonious. I know what it is to be kicking back some ribs, you know, and nobody gonna talk me out of my ribs in Savannah. I'll tell you that right now.
What did you say wrote the book?
Michael T. Joseph. He was an accountant that worked in a slaughterhouse, and his office was on the second floor. And he looked down, and his book was what he saw happen on the slaughterhouse floor. And from that point on, I couldn't. Now, the reason why I'm vegetarian, number 2 reason, is because of what it does to the human body. Because you don't have enzymes to break meat down. Okay? But my number 1 reason for being vegetarian more is spiritual. And that is that I'm at the point in my life where I do not believe that it is correct to kill an animal when I know there's so many other things I could eat in its place. See, once you know better, you gotta do better. So now I know better. And there's no reason why one of the Creator's creations has to be sacrificed for me to eat when I know there are so many other wonderful things that I could eat. So that's my number 1 reason for being vegetarian now. Now, I've grown to that. But that first one was when I figured out what happened on that slaughterhouse floor. I couldn't handle meat no more. And I had a thing for chicken fajitas. You know, McDonald's chicken fajitas at that. Yeah, I was into Crack Donald. Crack Donald, Murder King, Haunted Castle. I kicked it all. You know, and I enjoyed it. I licked my lips. You know, but
Is your whole family vegetarian?
not necessarily. We're, you know, and I believe in leading by example. And I never forced it on them, because I once had a friend that his family were hippies back in the 60s, you know, and they were straight up vegetarian. And he said that growing up and the influences around him, he said the first thing he did when he went to college was to get a whole pizza and a case of beer. And he said he swore off that for the rest of his life. He'd been eating meat and everything else since then. And he said maybe if his fathers and mother hadn't forced it, maybe he would have grown into it. And I've often believed in doing it by example. You know, if my family could see me, they are not where they used to be, you know, and there is means of growth, you know, but I just don't force, because when you force, you drive them to what it is that you want them to move away from. Whereas if you lead by example and show you can be healthy and, you know, moving around and enjoying food, enjoying eating, you know, because I do the cooking in my house, you know, and I enjoy it.
I know you do.
I have my own pans too,
Me too. Me 3.
my own fork.
That's how I stay married.
Spoon.
My husband had to buy his set, I buy mine.
That's the bottom line.
That's it.
Nothing against anybody, it's just that, you know, I don't want no pork on my fork.
Learn.
But it took a while to get here, because I'm telling you, I used to lick my lips on that. Chicken wings, ooh, wait.
Oxtails, deer meat. Oh my God.
Oh my goodness. Stop.
Hot sauce.
Yeah, oh yeah, no, I still do hot sauce now. In fact, I make my own hot sauce. And it's hot too. Scotch bonnet, all that, oh yeah. Please, my sister. Because I'm still, I still engage in byproducts. You know, I put milk in my coffee, and there are times I like to eat ice cream, and sometimes I eat cake. Those are all things that I will grow to, you know, but right now, like I say, the most important, for me, it's the sacrifice of the animal. That's my number 1 reason, but there are still things that I enjoy, you know, and I don't do it frequently, but I do it enough not to call myself a vegan, you know, but I'm gonna grow, you know, and I know that, yeah, we all are, you know, and, you know, I want to grow into it where I'm enjoying it.
Me 3.
I'm a vegetarian, they say never, but I just can never see myself eating meat again. I just can't. But they say never, but I can't say that about putting milk in my coffee. I can't say that about using brown sugar, which I use. You know, there are things that I just can't say now.
Yeah, but a guava's good.
Say again?
That's what I use now, guava.
Yeah, but just, you know, and Dr. Sabi, because I've been going to Sabi since '88,
Okay.
and he encouraged us to use maple syrup.
Yeah,
And
I've heard
I've
that
tried
too.
maple syrup in
And
my
that's
coffee.
Not the same. Oh, it just. So,
I'd rather quit drinking coffee
I know
than
that's
put
right.
maple syrup. If I can't have a real thing, it ain't gonna go down. You know, and I still have a thirst to enjoy life. There are things that I enjoy. And I've given up so much in so many ways of my past. I don't want to become unhappy.
That's it.
What I do, I want to be ready to do. And I've often said there's nothing better than arriving at a place in life when it's your time.
Yes.
Where you'll never look back. Like I'll never look back and miss meat. I just wouldn't do that. But I'm at the point now where I still will miss my taster's choice. So I gotta keep drinking coffee and put a little bit of milk and a couple pieces of sugar up in there. Brown sugar, at least that's better than white sugar.
Right.
But that's just an excuse I put in my head just so I can put that sugar in there.
I know that's right.
But that's me. You know, right now that's me. And I encourage us to move where you can enjoy your life, because when all is said and done, if you're not enjoying this process, you know,
What's the purpose of living?
yeah, and you know, to me there are things that I feel much better now, but I still enjoy certain things. And every so often I like my Haagen-Dazs.
Yeah, that's the best. But
Sometimes I like it, you know.
Ooh, that put on so much weight.
The reason I'm glad.
Yeah, but you see, moderation.
I don't know how to just eat a little bit.
Yeah, you see, that's the other point of all this. It's behavior modification.
I don't even eat it.
One of the things that I noticed in Europe
I let it go.
is that they have small plates, and their pastries are light. They're not heavy with sugar. They also are happy with a square pastry, small, you know. And so to me, it's always been important to do things in moderation. And sometimes where we live, we do things, once we get something, we can't control what we do. And so, you know, moderation to me is important. I get my coffee, I put whatever it is, but I don't drink it all day long. You know, I just have what I enjoy, move on to the next thing. Sometimes I have ice cream, but I don't have it all the time. And see, when I buy it, my family get on my case, because when I buy it, I'm ready to eat it in 6 days. But it's gone by then. It's gone after the second day.
And I can understand why. But yogurt couldn't be good.
But you see, my thing is like, you know, they say, well, you waited too long.
Yeah,
I say, well, that's no excuse.
it really is.
You know, you could have left a little bit up in there
I
for me.
know the last of it at least.
So I've learned, I eat out. You know, when I'm going to do it, I eat out. And the other thing, I hide stuff. I got hiding places where I hide stuff, right? And so they say, hey, do you have any chocolate? I said, I ain't got no chocolate. I got that hidden, because when I'm willing to share,
Yeah, but don't take
but
it
when I'm ready to get it,
in and in.
that's when I'm going to let you know I got it.
That's it.
Because then I say, oh, you want some of this? They say, how long you had that? I had that 3 weeks. But I wasn't going to bring it out 3 weeks ago because I wasn't ready to eat it.
That's right.
Behavior modification. You know, like I can get things and don't indulge in them, and then I get a taste for it. And then I indulge, but then I share, and in sharing, I don't eat the whole thing. I just share it, you know. So,
That's wonderful.
huh?
That's wonderful. I mean, that's a good concept, you know.
Yeah, but some people don't share.
Yeah.
Even if you buy it for them, you wait till they open it and you want to taste it and they say no. That's crazy.
But I understand, though, what they're going through.
Yeah.
You know, because there's a number of people in my family, so it's not like just a few people. But, you know, my thing is that when I buy it, I have a taste for it when I see it.
Yeah.
Vanilla fudge ice cream. Wow, I have a taste for it. But by the time I get home, I don't have a taste for it.
Ice cream. They don't even have that.
But in 6 days, all of a sudden, I say, wow, I think I'm going to get me some of that vanilla fudge. I go up in the freezer, it's gone.
What in the world? And you can't hide
And I
that.
say, what happened to the vanilla
You
fudge?
can't hide that.
They say it's been gone 3 days. I said, well, that ain't right. They say, well, it's real. It may not be right, but it's real. Next time you better get it when you get it.
I know that's
That's why I hide.
I know man, I can have something at home though I already have it, and I'll be in the store still getting the same thing.
Yeah, yeah, and but to me, I think life is meant to be enjoyed.
It is.
But you also we have to be mindful and careful of what we enjoy.
Too much of it.
And too much of anything is not a very good thing. And so, but I'm not where I used to be, and I'm not where I want to be,
Yeah, same.
but I still indulge in byproducts.
Trying to break that down.
I'm working on it. So, what you're looking at here is the essay that I'll download to you, if you so choose to get the downloads. This is the African presence in the ancient Mediterranean world. And this is, and you'll have to adjust the rotation. Oops. Which is the first essay. And what I've done is I have blocked out the essay that you'll be reading. And this one is the African presence in the ancient Mediterranean Isles and mainland Greece. And the book is The African Presence in Early Europe. So if you have the book, then you just go to that chapter. That's what we're using today. And there are just a number of things that I found to be very interesting, as it relates to understanding the presence of African people in this particular area. And remember, what I also want to do is I want you to keep in mind this map. And this essay is talking about this area. And, he says that at an early period, the Sahara region and the Mediterranean shared close cultural kinships. And he's going back 7,300 to 4,000 BC. The Sahara served as a lush vegetative region, which is also very important to understand, because when you look at North Africa, and then you look at the Sahara, and then you look at the Mediterranean, what you're looking at is very serious trade going on in this part of the world. What's going to happen is you're going to have a very serious ice age. The worm ice age is going to hit basically above the 51st parallel, which is going to cut Europe in half. It's going to cut Ireland in half. It's going to cut England in half. It's going to go across the polar belt, even to America. We spoke about it last week in terms of the ice ages. While the northern climate is having the ice, is going to be very heavy rain in Africa. That's good and that's bad. The good part is that in those areas where there's going to be heavy rain, the good thing is that it will grow in areas where the land can handle the heavy rain. Everything is going to grow lush. It's going to grow big. It's going to grow wonderful. But in other areas, the ground is going to become saturated. And in it becoming saturated, and then the heat on top of that saturation is going to burn the land. And that burnt land is going to become what we call Sahara. Now that Sahara is not going to come into existence until 8,000, maybe 5,000, somewhere in there, because we don't know time, BC. But before that, in the lushness of the land, before the Ice Age, it was just all green land. It was growing great vegetation. It was had a lot of minerals, it had wonderful things, and there was a lively trade that occurred. And the way in which they traded was to move from North Africa across the Mediterranean Sea into the countries that bounded the Mediterranean basin, such as France, Spain, Italy, Greece, Turkey. What we today call countries like Albania and Montenegro and Bosnia and Herzegovina, Croatia, Slovenia, these were all African places. The Kushites lived there. There were no Europeans there yet, because those Africans that had been locked up into the Ice Age, even before the Ice Age really impacted them, they still were locked up there. They were not in this area. But Africans, because of trade, were in this area. So the point that I'm making is there's a reason why Africans would be in the Mediterranean basin. And this is going to, later on in our next class, we're going to come down into North Africa, and I'm going to show you in places in North Africa where you're going to have the Numidian nation, and you're going to have what's called Carthage, or Carthage, and the story of the Phoenicians. Now, when you see the Phoenicians they show you are basically what might be considered a mixed people, called Semitic people. Semitic means mixture. So Semite is not a language. As you were, my bad. Semite is a language. It's not a people. You cannot be Semitic. You speak Semitic, but you're not Semitic. See, this has been created in the minds. This is an illusion that we've bought into. Please, brother.
So Semite is not people, it's a language?
It's a language, yeah. It's a language, which means mixture. At the base of the Semitic language is the African language, but Indo-European probably is built over that because of environment. They had words that they brought into the vocabulary, which created a syntax and grammar of the language. But you cannot be a Semite. A Semite isn't a person, it's a language. And Semite, semi, means mixture. So in this area here, there's going to be, in this area that you see that's light, all of this area here is going to be Cushitic for thousands of years. This is where you see the temples of Minoan, you see the temples in Crete, Cyprus, Malta. You go to Israel, Lebanon. You're dealing with a Canaanite nation in this part of the world, which then is going to move into Syria. And that's why Syria, Lebanon was part of Syria. That's the ongoing battle. The same way Kuwait was part of Iraq. But because of the geographic location, Lebanon was cut away from Syria. Because of oil, Kuwait was cut away from Iraq. And puppet governments were put in place. So it becomes important as we're moving through this conversation, looking at what we're going to get into future with the Moors, that this is the lively trade going on in this part of the world. It's real, and it's happening. And there's a reason for it, because you don't have the Sahara that separates the northern part of Africa from what they call, sub-Saharan Africa. That doesn't exist. Before 10,000 BC, sub-Saharan, there was no Sahara, so therefore it was a joined land. There is evidence that at some point in time, in fact, they've done x-rays of North Africa, and what they find is that there are tunnels under the desert that many of the people that were doing trading didn't want to stop trading, but they couldn't cross the desert. So what they did is they built tunnels underground, and they would come up and they built little cities. And what do we call those little cities today in a desert? Say it. An oasis, where they came up for water, fresh air, feed the animals, and they go back down. In fact, animal bones have been found in these tunnels. There's a brother named Yosef Ben Levi out of Chicago. doing some phenomenal work on looking underground of the North African desert because they didn't want to stop trading. But they knew they couldn't cross deserts like that. So they built underground tunnels where they would travel for miles. And that's another thing about the Egyptian, the Kemetic temples. I went into some temples where I had to stop walking. I thought I was going to end back up in New York. I say that in jest, but they're deep. There are tunnels that go for long places. You know, it go for a couple miles. I had to stop walking because I didn't know where I was going to end up. And I didn't know if I found my way back. So I said, let me stop here and go back. I know my way now. Our ancestors were absolutely geniuses when it came to engineering, but we just haven't been exposed to it, so that thoughts that don't go into your mind never manifest themselves, so that when someone tells an absolute lie, when someone tells a perfect lie, the truth is unbelievable. And that's what we're experiencing. They have convinced us that we are primitive, as opposed to the master builders that we are, the master thinkers that we are. And you don't have to go far to see it. Like I tell people, you don't have to go back to Kemet for a classical African civilization. You can go back to the plantation. The people on the plantation, that was a classical African civilization. When you go to the Caribbean, Central South America, and you observe what African people did, that's a classical African civilization. See, we all think we got to go back into ancient history. You don't have to. You go to the civil rights movement. That's a classical African civilization. So to be put upon the way in which people were put upon, and yet still they rise. I think what's happening today, and I think Donald Trump is correct. He is going to make America great again. Because he's forcing people. Like I tell people everywhere I go, I say, good morning. This is a wake-up call. Good morning. And that's going to force people to get together. It's going to force us to put down these superficial complexion, hair texture, language we speak. Okay? People say, no, that Willie Lynch, he got to die. To bring back that commonality, that struggle that we once had, that now is looking at us right in the face. We're being forced to get up, stand up, like Bob Marley said. So, one of the things that you're looking at as you go through this essay, and these are just some of the things that become important, is that, you know, when you look at, and the picture may not be that great, but I just want to show it to you. I'm going to have to do this with all the pictures that I have, because when I scanned it, I had to scan it this way. Oops. These are some of the and I could just really just show you one, but this is Libya, found by Phaestos, Phaestos. Now, when you look at the way in which our ancestors did their artwork, one of the things that is very important to understand is that when you see these little marks on the face of a beard, that means the hair was very curly. Because you can see other pictures that was meant to be what might be considered to be Aryan or Indo-European, where the hair is carved differently, where it is meant to look like it's straight. When you see this on the face or on the head, this depicts an Africoid head. And again, this is a figure of Bes that's found in Knossos, again in the Mediterranean area. It's a silver pendant of Bes. Bes was the first nature brought from inner Africa north. This is the head, the body. Okay, here you have a Minoan captain from Gnosis, 1550 to 1500 BC. Very clear African face. The hair, purposely made to be very curly. Okay, down here, this is a jewel relief fragment. A head of a black woman wearing earrings. You can see the earrings. I saw a sister on 25th Street had earrings look like that. Or on Broad Street, we're in New Jersey. And again, look at the hair, the brow ridge, the nasal index, the prognostic jaw, the width of the lips. See, this becomes important when you're deciphering. You got to know what you're looking for. Now, these are these are domestic and maritime exhibitions, again from the Mediterranean area. You might not see it, but these are ships. In the book is a much better picture. But you can see the maritime, you can see the boats, and you can see Africans on the boats. Which again, it depicts the presence of Africans on the Mediterranean Sea. That's the point I'm trying to make. And once you start reading some of the material, it becomes clearer and clearer how dominant African people were on the Mediterranean Sea. And here you have a war scene. And you have a pastoral scene. This one, page 50, that's the pastoral scene. That's showing the everyday life of the pastors taking care of animals, African peoples. And this is in the Mediterranean area. And then down on the next page is a war scene where you see Africans. Okay? Now, something I just want to show you here. Look, here's the boxers. These are boxing princes. And again, you see the variation. But it's obvious that they have braids, because you would normally see with when they were depicting the Eurasian, the hair would be free flowing. But when you specifically see things that look like braids, they purposely wanted you to see that the hair was separated into different braids, like braids would look. And again, these are people of varying complexions. You know, where they go from, because remember in the Mediterranean you don't have the heat of the sun, so therefore they might be a lighter complexion brown. But basically these are still an African people. Their hair texture may be a little bit different, may not be as curly, but still these are an African people. These are not a mixed people yet. Here you have a stag hunt, hunting for animals. Here, the bow and arrow, and here you have the individual, obviously of African descent. You can see by the face. Here you have someone of African descent on what might be considered a chariot. And by the way, this is a ring for the finger. And on the bottom you have the spearman and the lion. It's a gold bead seal found in Mycenaean. So, this basically, and then all of these other have the, has pictures. There's the prince again, the priest. Portrait of an African piece from Pylos. See, all this is in the Mediterranean area, and like I say, you're not going to hear them say Greece, you're not going to hear them say Slovenia. They're talking about different national groups, such as geographic locations like Pylos or Mycenaean. Not necessarily what we today would call a country. Here you have up here, again, look at the way in which they depicted the hair. Okay, this is a mirror handle, which means that they had mirrors, which that they had mastered technology to the level that they could make mirrors, which meant they had to have an understanding of glass. See, these are the little things that when you know, it tells you the type of technology, because you can't be thinking on this level if you've not moved through higher levels of thinking. And so all of this is evidence of it, and this is what I try to walk us through, because there really is no way I could ever spend the kind of time I'd like to going through everything. But there are other things that I can go through. Then, of course, what I just want to share with you is James Brunson, a genius photojournalist, his notes, which is very important when you study the notes, because he's not coming from nowhere with this information. This brother's done some serious study, and that's why Dr. Van Sertima had such respect for him, because James Brunson, there's some serious research went into doing this essay. Okay, so that's one of them. That's one of the essays. And with what our brief overview did, and that's why I wanted to do it this way, because what this brief overview did is that now when you go back to study on your own, you have a sense of what we've talked about. So when you go into the actual writing, you start to embellish, enhance, reach out, and you'll come with certain things. You say, wow, of course. But what I've attempted to develop in terms of the way in which I teach, or I try to develop these types of classes, is to get you going in order for you to understand the reading from another perspective. The next one is Black Athena. Okay, now there's been discussion about Black Athena. Okay, I can understand. Great book. Written by Martin Bernal. They now have three volumes of Black Athena, and it's called The African and Levantine Roots of Greece. And of course, Levantine, you know, the reason why they call, that they've corrected Isis to Isil, is because Isis, the last S, represents Syria. Isil, with the L, represents the Levant. The Levant is an area, not a particular country. Now, this was the challenge that some folk had towards Martin Bernal, phenomenal scholar. But they said that in his book, he was attempting to include a certain group of non-African people in the history of Egypt. He did a phenomenal job in exposing the Africanness of it, but it appeared that he was trying to include people in the development of Kemet that didn't belong there. So that's why he calls it the Levant. Egypt don't have no Levantine roots. It's Cushitic roots, period. End of conversation. There are influences from the Levant after the kingdoms of Kemet, but not in building of Kemet. And so that's the point that I just want to make. But with that, I wouldn't want to take away from us the ability to look at this work, because he has done some phenomenal research here. And so, again, just going through some of Black Athena by Martin Bernal, what he's actually talking about is the depth of the language. And what I liked about this is that the origins of the many non-Indo-European elements in the Greek language, toponyms and divine and mythological names, come from Africa. That's what I think is very instructive here. Because at the core of the Greek language, I'm going to just go off for a moment, because now that I said that, I should have included this. In my presentation. I didn't get a chance to do it, but I'll do it now. We talk about Dr. Walter Williams. Okay, this is part of his work. Okay? This comes out of his book, The Historical Origins of Christianity. So when I say that there is no Greek language, when I say there is no Latin language, what I mean is that here is the medunetta symbol for the letter A. It's represented by a vulture. At some point in time, the symbols, see, in order to study language, you have to study sounds. For instance, when our ancestors, many thousands of years ago, saw a falcon overhead and come down, the span of the wings as it was flapping made a sound. The sound it made was so the sound of the bird's wings became the name Heru, 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 Heru. The word for heart is Ab. The word for soul is Ba. But what does the heart sound like when it's beating? Upper, 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 upper. You see? So when we're looking at the early formations of languages, now there are people that take what I'm saying to another level. I understand that, okay? But this is a Kaba thought. And a Kaba thought with a lot of inside research, not so much on deciphering medunetta, which is very important. There are people far better than myself doing this. Raketi Wimby is one. You can go to Chicago, to the Center for Inner City Studies, doing phenomenal work. Okay, so I don't say that. There's other people doing great work, far greater than mine.
You said Raketi what?
Raketi Wimby, Rekhety, Wimby. She's on the internet. If you Google her, she teaches medunetta online. She has some good books too. But what I'm trying to get to is the beginnings of language. The beginnings of language is not going to come by just making words up. It's going to come from your sensory perceptions, looking at the things around you, and in order for you to be able to identify those things, you create a collective word that every time you see it, that's what it becomes. Your first entry of intellect is your perceptual world, which is your senses. Okay? Out of your senses, you build images. From images, you bring words that describe that, and then you have an intuition that allows you to understand what you've created. So when I look what's right now, that's a chair. But it took a while for me to get to call that a chair. And if I were in another part of the world, I might call it something different, but it still would mean chair. So that the beginnings of language come from an association of your perceptual world that leads you to create an image, that leads you to create a concept or a word for your image, and then you intuitively begin to refer back. Every time I see anything look like that, it's a chair. Even if it's not a chair, if it's shaped like that, I'll call it a chair. It could be a table that you set things up on, but I say, wow, that looked like a chair, okay? Now, the reason why I tell you this is because in order for us to go back and understand this world, this Mediterranean world, you have to put these things in place and be very clear intellectually what you're talking about. And so this is what we do with language. So they saw a vulture, and the vulture makes a sound. Ah, ah, ah. So they drew a picture of a vulture, and when they saw the vulture made the sound ak, so they described ak, that would then become a script. And from this script, they created a second script, which became that. That is what the Greeks took and made the letter A. The Greeks, who were the teachers of the Romans, that became that. And then, of course, what the Romans added was lowercase. See, the only thing we're concerned about in language, really, is the consonants. Vowels are meant to separate through sound consonants. English is very interesting because they got short A, long A. They have a doctor's A. So there's different variations that you're dealing with. The same thing with the B. When you go down all of these Medunetta symbols, here's the lion representing the letter L, which is going to become that in script. Going to become that which they're going to take to the next level script, which the Greeks are going to do that to. It's going to go across, and that's the Roman, and that's what we do. In other words, what I'm saying is that there is no Greek language, because Dr. Van Sertima says to have a language, you have to have a script that's particular to that language. English is not a language. Spanish is not a language. Italian, German, not a language. Romanian, not a language. Because they all use what? Roman script. Roman script is Greek script. Greek script is Kemetic or Egyptian script. But now let me take you back and show you where it came from in Egypt, which is the Coptic language. That's Ethiopia. Cushitic again. And so here you have the Coptic A. That's why the Coptic Greek and Coptic Egyptian is so close. And many people believe that the language Giz is the vocalization of the symbolic pictographic language of Medunetta. And then you add numbers. And that's where the Romans got that all stuff messed up. Because what the Romans did, they took letters and made them numbers. Confused the whole thing. So the only time we ever see Roman numerals now is on buildings or on old movies. What did they do for 1,000? What's the letter for 1,000? Say again? Close. Close. 1,000. It's okay. I would have forgotten it too, because it don't mean nothing. It don't mean anything. That's why we don't use it anymore. It's M. M.
Or see that a lot.
And 500 is what?
C, I thought too. Maybe C is 100.
D. 100 is C. Okay. 50 is L. 10 is, and 5 is, and then the singular is I. Nothing messed all that up. They had to throw that stuff away. That stuff don't even work no more. This is how we know they didn't invent that. Okay? So I just wanted to show you this. This is something that I do in terms of just understanding Medunetta. And again, those of you who come to see Walter Williams tomorrow, his book, Historic Origins of Christianity, Historical Origins of Islam. I think he's working on one with Judaism. Dr. Williams, elder to me, great friend of mine, Spent some time with him in Chicago. I love and respect the brother dearly. You know, for those of you who come, you will get a kick out of him tomorrow. I'll tell you that right now. Because he's quite an animated brother. He's an elder brother, but he's just absolutely brilliant. I have a great deal of respect for his scholarship and what he's done, and his just depth of understanding. You know, but this is what we're talking about in the African roots of Greece. Because Greece is going to be where, for whatever reason, that's what's going to be brought down to us. But there were other places that were as powerful when you look, because when you're looking at Greece, you know, you're looking at Greece over here. Okay? But there's a reason why this would be, because it's just above Kemet or Egypt. And many of the human beings, many of the people that lived in this area came to Kemet to study. Sailors of Miletus, and we'll talk about some of the scholars as we get into. And again, this is just going over the reading so that you can get a better sense once you start reading it. And what I want to do now is look at the stolen legacy. Which is the next essay. And just to give you a sense of what he's talking about. Oh man. Okay. Just to give you a sense of what he's talking about is that he breaks down. See, now here's where you get the sense that the Cushites that were in this part of the world brought this knowledge there, because what George G.M. James did in Stolen Legacy and what John Williams is writing out here is the fact that here are the pre-Socratic Ionian schools. Okay? You have the school of Thales of Miletus. Now here's the key. I taught Cush and Kemet in college, SUNY New Paltz, upstate. And I taught this class, and there were people in the classics department that sort of kind of challenged me. They wanted to know a little bit more. And here was my question to them. And this is what you ask classical students and teachers when you want to talk about exactly where all this information came from. You'll see that Thales of Miletus is said to live 620 to 546, give or take. Here's the question. Ask any classicist, who taught Thales of Miletus? That's the question. Who taught Thales of Miletus? And the reason why is because Thales of Miletus is really considered to be the first person of Greek or Ionian background or Milesian background that comes on the scene in the classical world. 620. 620. The 25th dynasty had already risen and fallen. The Persians were on their way into Africa by this time. And yet this is as far back as you can go. Then you have Anaximenes, and then you have Pythagoras. But Pythagoras, in other works, such as Iamblichus, and I know I'm throwing this at you, but I'm just doing it for the DVD to be able to go back sometime and to be able to see. But what I want to frame for you is there was a contemporary of Pythagoras, even elder to Pythagoras. His name was Iamblichus. I-A-M Blichus, Iamblichus, who is recorded as telling Pythagoras, if you want to get the knowledge and wisdom of the world, go to Egypt, or whatever they called Egypt. Go there, because that's where all the students go. In other words, the same way people say, if you really want to get into stuff, come to the United States. Well, Egypt was the United States of the ancient world. If you wanted to be anything or anybody, you went to Egypt. And by the way, his name was not Pythagoras. His name was Pythagoras. So these are the so-called early people. Now, Ionia was in Asia Minor. Asia Minor is the countries we today call Israel, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and you could go even deeper eastward and northward into Turkey, or they also went in Egypt, but Asia Minor is considered to be that part of the world. That's why they're trying to make Egypt the Middle East, because they're trying to pull Egypt out of Africa. And so they're in the what's called the Eleatic philosophers. You have Xenophanes, Parmenides, and Zeno, and you can see those dates. And Elia is located in southern Italy, which again, you're going back to Kush, inside these places. Now you have the Ionian school. See, this is where you're getting closer to what is going to become Greece. Ionian. Heraclitus, Anaxagoras,